We're still seeing a lot of results from around the country, state by state, not just elected officials, but also ballot provisions and new laws that got passed by the people of various states. And over in Oregon, they passed new restrictions on gun ownership. And a lot of people are comparing it to District of Columbia's restrictions on gun ownership. Is it that bad, or is it just Oregon being Oregon? Joining us right now is a woman who knows everything there is to know about the D.C. gun laws and carry laws. She literally wrote the book about it. It's called Emily Gets Her Gun. She is Emily Miller, journalist in the District of Columbia, and her Substack is called Emily Post News. Emily, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's always entertaining when people try to mimic DC's terrible gun laws.
Right, exactly. Someone in Oregon is saying, boy, they really messed up in DC. The Supreme Court struck it down. It's unconstitutional. We'll do our version.
We'll do it. Well, right, exactly.
But it's not that bad. Just so everybody knows, in DC, you like I said, you wrote the book about this. They said that you couldn't have a carry permit. You had to beg the government to allow you to carry your gun to protect yourself, right?
Right. Well, yes, exactly. And we have the carry laws in DC are actually pretty reasonable. Unlike Oregon, with what we're talking about is buying a gun. Carry laws in DC are pretty reasonable. If you want to get a carry permit, you most likely can. But DC has DC is so extreme, and now Oregon is mimicking it, in that they require you to tell the government, the police department, every time you have a gun, and you have to get it approved. So every time you buy a gun, you have to go through training, you have to get fingerprints, you have to go through all this stuff. That's just to own a gun. And I mean, we do have the Second Amendment.
Right.
I mean, I just want to reiterate.
Exactly. You have to understand how foreign this is. I mean, I know you do understand how foreign this is to the rest of the country, because it's like, if the government is giving you permission to own a gun, then how exactly is it a right? I mean, that's the opposite of a right.
Right.
So now, so let's swing over to Oregon, though, because what they just passed, it sounds somewhat similar. You have to have the police pre-authorize the purchase of a gun. How does that work exactly?
Yes. Well, there are some states that are like what Oregon just did. Oregon just had all these anti or pro-gun control activists pouring tons of money into this decision, and so into this ballot, and they won. I mean, it passed. I don't think it's going to stand up in court over the long term. But what they have passed says that in order to buy a gun, you first have to get a permit. So your Second Amendment rights do not exist until you go to the government, you take a training class, you pay fees, and then you can buy a gun after that permit. So this is 100% going to be challenged in court, because we just had the Supreme Court rule in the Bruin case in June that in order for a gun control law to be on the books, it has to match the text of the Constitution. Second Amendment's pretty brief, doesn't take long to read. It has to have a law at the time of the founding of the government that was exactly the same. And I can tell you, without even going back into the history books, there was no law like the Oregon law or the DC law that says that you have to go get a permit before buying your gun.
Right.
You just got to go buy the musket on your own.
Right. Right, the musket. Exactly. And Lord knows you couldn't get a cannon back then. Oh, no, wait, actually, you could get a cannon. But this is what's also remarkable. I mean, the one thing you think about when you think of the state of Oregon is Portland, and there's been nothing but violent crime with looting and arson and riots and mayhem in the streets of Portland for the last several years. So basically, they only want those bad guys to have the weapons, because if my daughter got a job in Portland, I would want her to be able to protect herself from that mayhem. And now, the police have to give you permission.
It is really strange, because and that's the whole thing of every gun control law. The premise of these gun control laws is that they think they're going to stop crime. But the criminals, I promise you, nobody in Oregon who is a criminal, and as you said, riding on the streets in Portland, not one of them is going to go get a permit to buy a gun. Not one.
Right.
Because they're going to have to show up at the police station, and the police are looking for them because they're criminals.
Right.
So the only thing this does is only affects the law-abiding people. The law-abiding people, as you said, we live in these really violent cities now. We all want to carry a gun for self-defense.
Yeah.
But it passed. Look, this ballot measure passed. It is law.
Of course it did, yeah. But
It's always
Emily,
going to
you're
take
so
some of
right.
the
It's like the authors of this law think that the conversation that a criminal is having is, gee, guys, we should go and riot, and we should loot, and we should conduct armed robbery, and maybe grand theft auto, maybe even assault with a deadly weapon. Maybe we'll even murder somebody. But you know what? It's against the law to illegally own a gun. So let's not break that law.
Yeah, let's just take a bat.
That's standing in the way of us
fine.
committing murder. It makes no logical sense, but it comes from the left. So, of course, now, you've already said so, but you think is this immediately challenged? This immediately gets challenged in court?
Yeah. Well, look, the D.C. law has been challenged, and because it was challenged before the Bruen case in the Supreme Court, the D.C. gun registry law, just so you know, you have to register with the police department every single gun that you own. You have to go to them. You have to go through the permission. And it's been challenged, but it has not been challenged before Bruen. So it's going to have to get re-challenged. And the same thing's going to happen in Oregon. Someone's going to have to challenge this law, and it's going to have to go through all the courts and go through the district courts and the appeals courts. So it'll take a while. Eventually, because of the Supreme Court ruling, eventually this will probably get overturned. But it's going to take years. And in those years, people in Oregon, or like people in D.C., cannot have their Second Amendment rights to keep arms without telling the government.
Listen, while we're talking about crazed maniacs who use guns to kill people, is there an update on the Alec Baldwin story? I know you've been covering this like no other journalist. And I did see, like the week before the election, they announced that they had closed their investigation, but they're not going to tell anybody what the results of that investigation are? What do you expect to happen here?
I'm so sorry to laugh, Larry, because obviously there's an innocent victim, Helena Hutchins, who was killed. And I only laughed because of the way you introduced Alec Baldwin. He is such a menace to society. I mean, even before he killed someone by pointing a loaded gun at her and pulling the trigger, he's been assaulting people for years. So I do associate him with Portland.
It's my fault for being flippant about it, but you understood the point I was making.
Wanted to explain. But so it is very strange what happened. So the sheriff's department in Santa Fe finished their investigation. It took them over a year, which seems kind of crazy, but they finally finished it. And instead of having a press conference and saying, this is the charges that we recommend, they quietly and secretly gave it over to the prosecutor. And then the prosecutor, instead of announcing charges, said she's going to do her own investigation. So we're well over a year now. And Alec Baldwin continues to say that he's not going to get charged with any crime and continues to, be in movies, be in theater, do all this stuff. And it has dragged on and dragged on. And I can't think there's any other American who would be able to get away with this for this long. But it is looking, the longer this drags out, it's looking very less likely that he will be charged with a crime.
Emily, let's say for dramatic purposes here on my television program here, I was going to use a gun for some reason. And one of the people who works on the show hands me the gun and they say it's not loaded. And then I pull the trigger while pointing it at someone, and God forbid they get shot and killed. Is there any doubt in your mind that I'm arrested? Arrest first, ask questions later, right? I mean, I might have a good excuse, and the jury might believe me, or maybe the prosecutor might. But don't I get arrested for that?
Yes, right. You do, right? So, well, frankly, if you did on MSNBC, you probably wouldn't get arrested. It really, it just depends on right. But look, the excuse that Baldwin has used is that like you were just saying, oh, they handed it to me, I'm just acting, I didn't know. It doesn't matter. It's a gun. It's a real gun. It's not a prop. Anyone who has possession of a gun, and he has said this, he knows the gun control rules. He knows the safety rules. He says he knows not to pull the trigger. And he says he didn't pull the trigger. He pulled the trigger, the FBI said. But you're right. Of course, like any of us, I've been in this situation, like doing videos or doing TV interviews or doing my book cover where someone has handed me a gun and said it's not loaded. And I go, okay, thanks. And then I check it myself. And then I still don't put my finger on the trigger. Right. And then I still don't shoot it, hold it pointed at the photographer.
That's right.
So, those of us who are responsible, he was irresponsible. Well, the question is going to be, is it illegal? We'll find out.
Emily Miller, she's a great journalist. Again, the book is called Emily Gets Her Gun. It's a great read, and it tells all about what it's like to have to navigate D.C.'s gun laws, which now apparently in their own way are getting replicated elsewhere in the country. Check out her Substack. It's Emily Post News. Thanks, Emily. More to come on O'Connor Tonight.